Captain Lee's gaze fixed on the small television screen in the command tent. He stood rigid, hands clasped behind his back. The regular farming report had cut out mid-sentence, replaced by a pale-faced news anchor. "We interrupt this broadcast with breaking news," the woman said, her voice shaking. "Multiple unidentified objects have entered Earth's atmosphere. The Pentagon confirms these are not satellites or known space debris." The camera cut to grainy footage of massive dark shapes hanging in the sky, partially obscured by clouds. They dwarfed the passenger jets that usually dominated the airspace. "Aliens," whispered Sergeant Han beside him. "They're really here." Captain Lee didn't respond. His eyes remained locked on the screen as military officials appeared, urging calm while revealing almost nothing. The tent fell silent except for the muted broadcast and the distant rumble of artillery practice. Lieutenant Kim pushed through the tent flap, her normally composed face showing signs of strain. Her uniform was perfectly pressed despite the early hour and mounting chaos. "Captain, you're needed in the command tent," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "General Choi is on the secure line. All battalion commanders are being briefed." Lee nodded once and followed her out. Montana's crisp morning air hit his lungs, a sharp contrast to the stuffy tent. Their boots crunched over frost-covered grass as they hurried across the base. Soldiers rushed in all directions, their training containing what would otherwise be panic. "What do we know?" Lee asked. "Not much," Kim replied. "First contact was 3 hours ago. The objects appeared suddenly on the far side of the moon, then moved into Earth orbit. They didn't respond to any communication attempts." The main command tent buzzed with activity. Officers huddled around maps and communication equipment. Major Park spotted them and waved them over to a secure video terminal. "Captain Lee, Lieutenant Kim," he nodded. "The briefing starts in 2 minutes." The screen flickered to life, showing General Choi's weathered face. Behind him, military personnel moved quickly through what appeared to be an underground command center. "We have confirmed first contact with an extraterrestrial species," Choi began without preamble. "They call themselves the Terek Empire. They've established communication with multiple governments simultaneously." The screen split to show grainy footage of a tall, broad-shouldered figure. Its skin was pale gray with a rigid exoskeleton covering vital areas. 4 eyes, 2 large, 2 small, were arranged vertically on its face. "The Terek have conquered 12 star systems," Choi continued. "They've made it clear they intend Earth to be the 13th. They're transmitting in perfect English, Mandarin, Russian, and several other languages." Lee felt cold dread settling in his stomach. "Their technology level, sir." "Far beyond ours," Choi replied grimly. "Their ships range from 1 to 5 kilometers in length. They use some form of energy shield technology and directed energy weapons. Our satellite networks are being systematically disabled." Lieutenant Kim leaned forward. "Are we evacuating civilians, sir?" "Where to, Lieutenant?" Choi asked with a bitter smile. "These aren't localized landings. Reports indicate smaller craft deploying worldwide. Major cities remain untouched for now, but rural areas are seeing significant activity." The briefing continued with grim details. The Terek had sent identical messages to Earth's major powers: surrender or be conquered. Several smaller nations had already capitulated. Others, including the United States, Russia, and China, refused. When the call ended, Captain Lee turned to his officers. "Prepare the battalion for potential engagement. Lieutenant Kim, coordinate with local authorities about refugees. They'll be heading this way soon." Aboard the Terek flagship, General Dak strode across the command deck. His metals clinked against his natural armor as subordinates scrambled to avoid his path. "Show me the human defenses again," he ordered. A 3-dimensional map appeared, highlighting Earth's military installations. Red dots represented nuclear weapons, blue for conventional forces, green for naval assets. "Primitive," Dak chuckled, his secondary mouthparts clicking in amusement. Their most advanced weapons are simple projectiles and crude nuclear devices. Officer Mech approached cautiously. Some are suggesting we should not underestimate them, General. The humans show unusual adaptability. Adaptability means nothing against superior technology, Dak interrupted. How many worlds have we conquered with these same tactics? 12, sir, and this will be 13. Dak gestured to the map. Deploy the first wave according to plan. Target their communications and power infrastructure first. I want planetary surrender within 1 local week. The command deck buzzed with activity as orders were relayed. Mech lingered, clearly wanting to speak further. You have concerns, officer? Dak asked sharply. Our scans show unusual concentrations of elementary metals in their weapons, Mech said. Different from other species we've encountered. Our shields will handle anything they throw at us. Dak dismissed him with a wave. They can't even reach orbit without chemical propellants. Their nuclear weapons are basic fission devices. Dak addressed his assembled officers. Our shields will make this conquest swift and certain. The humans will understand their place in the Empire before their next lunar cycle. Back on Earth, Captain Lee's battalion worked through the night. Artillery pieces were checked and rechecked. Ammunition was counted, communications tested. Lieutenant Kim approached as dawn broke. First refugees coming through, sir, mostly from Billings and smaller towns east of here. Lee nodded, watching the distant road where headlights formed a continuous stream. Families fleeing with whatever they could carry. Any reports of direct engagement? He asked. Nothing confirmed, Kim replied. But we've lost contact with 3 military outposts within 200 miles. Lee was about to respond when a soldier ran toward them. Captain, Lieutenant, you need to see this. They followed him to the ridge overlooking the eastern valley. The morning sky, already bright with dawn, now glowed with unnatural light as 3 massive shapes descended through the clouds. Smaller craft detached from them, spreading out like deadly seeds. Terek dropships, Lee whispered. They're landing. The radio at his hip crackled. All units, stand by for orders. Do not engage unless fired upon. Repeat, do not engage unless fired upon. Lieutenant Kim's hand moved to her sidearm instinctively. They're between us and the refugee column. Captain Lee raised his binoculars. Through them, he could see the alien ships settling in the valley, crushing trees and farmhouses beneath them. Tall figures emerged, carrying weapons that pulsed with energy. Get everyone into defensive positions, Lee ordered quietly. Move the howitzers to the secondary firing points. We hold this line. As his soldiers rushed to comply, Lee watched the aliens begin to establish a perimeter. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearly veterans of many conquests. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that they had landed within range of one of the deadliest conventional weapons still in Earth's arsenal. Lee's 155mm howitzers could deliver high explosive rounds from beyond visual range. The question was whether they would have any effect against alien shields. We'll find out soon enough, Lee murmured to himself as the first civilians reached their lines, faces etched with terror as they described what they had seen. The battle for Earth had begun. 3 days after the initial landings, Captain Lee crouched behind a fallen tree, watching through binoculars as a Terek patrol moved through the forest below. The aliens moved with confidence, their tall forms easily visible among the pine trees. They carried weapons that resembled rifles but glowed with blue energy. They don't even try to hide, whispered Sergeant Han beside him. They don't think they need to. Lee couldn't argue with that assessment. Reports from across the globe told the same story. Conventional human weapons were proving nearly useless against the invaders. Their energy shields absorbed or deflected most attacks, and their armor handled whatever got through. Let's head back, Lee said, sliding down from their observation point. I want to be ready when they reach our position. The makeshift base camp was a flurry of activity when they returned. Soldiers dug trenches and erected barriers. The 4 howitzers, the battalion's primary weapons, were positioned on a slight rise, their long barrels pointing skyward. Lieutenant Kim approached, a tablet computer in her hands. Her uniform was smudged with dirt, and dark circles had formed under her eyes. None of them had slept much since the invasion began. "We've got reports from the 4th Infantry," she said. "They engaged a Terek unit near Billings. Standard firearms had no effect. Even their anti-tank weapons barely slowed them down." "Casualties?" Lee asked. Kim's face tightened. "Total. The aliens don't take prisoners." Lee nodded grimly. "What about our situation?" "The patrol you spotted is heading this way. ETA 30 minutes. We've evacuated all civilians from the area." She hesitated. "Sir, should we consider falling back? If conventional weapons don't work." "We hold here," Lee interrupted. "The ridge gives us good visibility, and we haven't tested the howitzers yet." He gestured toward the massive artillery pieces. "Those aren't conventional weapons, Lieutenant. They're designed to destroy targets you can't even see." Kim looked unconvinced, but nodded. "The men are ready, sir." Lee spent the next 20 minutes checking positions and reviewing the fire plan. The 4 howitzers were their only significant firepower. Each could fire a 155 mm shell over 20 kilometers, but they were planning to engage at much closer range for better accuracy. Corporal Park, their communications specialist, rushed over with a radio. "Captain, spotters report the alien patrol has changed direction. They're heading straight for us, moving fast." "They must have detected us," Lee muttered. "How many?" "About 20, sir. They have some kind of hover vehicle with them." Lee took the radio. "All units, prepare to engage. No small arms fire until my command. Artillery crews stand by." He climbed to the observation post where Lieutenant Kim was already watching through a spotting scope. "I see them," she said without looking up. 1 kilometer and closing. They're in combat formation." Through his binoculars, Lee could see the Terek patrol spreading out. Their hover vehicle, a platform about the size of a small truck, carried what looked like a heavy weapon. "They know we're here," he said. "Artillery, prepare to fire. Target the main group, proximity fuse." The howitzer crews sprang into action. The massive guns could be adjusted for direct fire if needed, but their real power came from indirect fire, shooting high into the air so shells would fall onto targets from above. The aliens were now clearly visible to everyone in the camp. Their confidence was unnerving. They advanced without seeking cover, their weapons held ready but not firing yet. 800 meters, Kim reported. 700. "Let them get closer," Lee ordered. He wanted to see how the aliens operated, what tactics they used. At 500 meters, the Terek stopped. One figure, taller than the others, stepped forward and raised a device to its face. "Humans." A mechanical voice boomed across the distance. "Your weapons cannot harm us. Surrender now and serve the Terek Empire, or be eliminated." Lee picked up a bullhorn. "This is Captain Lee of the United States Army. You are trespassing on sovereign territory. Withdraw immediately." The alien made a gesture that might have been laughter. "Primitive beings, you will learn submission." The Terek patrol resumed its advance. Lee could see energy shields shimmer around each alien, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. 400 meters, Kim whispered. "Should we open fire?" "Not yet," Lee replied. "Let them think we're afraid." At 300 meters, the aliens began firing. Blue energy bolts struck the earth around the human positions, scorching trees and setting grass ablaze. Several hit the barriers directly but did no damage to the soldiers behind them. "They're testing us," Lee realized. "Showing off." 200 meters, Kim reported, tension evident in her voice. "Sir, they'll be within assault range soon." Lee raised his hand. "All units, prepare to engage on my mark." He turned to the artillery crews. "Howitzer 1, target the main group. Fire." The massive 155 mm cannon roared, its recoil shoving it backward despite the heavy brakes. The shell screamed overhead in a high arc. "Impact in 5 seconds," the gun captain called out. The shell descended almost vertically, directly onto the Terek patrol. What happened next stunned everyone watching. The high explosive round passed straight through the energy shields without slowing. It detonated in the middle of the alien formation with a thunderous blast, throwing bodies and equipment in all directions. When the smoke cleared, at least half the patrol lay motionless on the ground. "Their shields," Lieutenant Kim said in disbelief. "It went right through them." The surviving Terek were in disarray, some taking cover, others firing wildly at the human positions. "All howitzers, fire for effect," Lee commanded. 3 more shells arced toward the aliens. Each passed through the energy shields as if they weren't there, detonating with devastating force. When the echoes faded and the smoke began to clear, not a single Terek remained standing. Lieutenant Kim lowered her binoculars, her hands shaking slightly. "Captain, I think I understand. Their shields must be calibrated against energy weapons, not physical projectiles." Lee nodded slowly as realization dawned. They expected lasers, plasma, weapons like theirs. They never prepared for simple kinetic force. "A cannonball," Sergeant Han said with a growing smile. "We just killed space aliens with what amounts to a really fast cannonball." Lee grabbed his radio. "Command, this is Captain Lee. Priority message. The Terek energy shields do not stop artillery shells. Repeat, their shields are ineffective against conventional artillery. We have confirmed kills." As confirmation came back, along with orders to hold position and await reinforcement, Lee looked at his howitzers with new appreciation. The massive guns had been in service for decades, considered almost obsolete in an age of smart bombs and guided missiles. Now they might be Earth's best hope. "Ready another round," he ordered. "And get word to any unit with artillery. We need to hit them before they realize what's happening." Lieutenant Kim was already coordinating with other units by radio. "Sir, another patrol reported 10 kilometers east. They're attacking a refugee column. Prepare to move Howitzer 2 and 3 to support. We'll show these aliens what humans can do." As his troops rushed to comply, Lee felt something he hadn't felt since the invasion began: hope. Captain Lee's discovery spread like wildfire through military channels. Within 24 hours, every artillery unit on the planet had received the news. Conventional shells could pass straight through Terek shields. At a makeshift command center in what was once a high school gymnasium, Lee watched as reports flooded in from across the globe. The old basketball scoreboard now displayed a map showing alien positions and human counterattacks. "Russia reports successful strikes near Moscow," Lieutenant Kim announced, reading from her tablet. British forces confirmed the same effect with their artillery near Manchester. Sergeant Han looked up from his communication station. "Captain, incoming call on the secure line." It's General Park." Lee's eyebrows rose in surprise. General Park was the newly appointed head of the United Nations Defense Force, coordinating what remained of Earth's military response. "Put him through," Lee said, straightening his uniform. The screen flickered to life, showing an older man with stern features and silver hair. His uniform bore the insignia of the South Korean Army, though he now represented all of Earth's nations. "Captain Lee," the general nodded. "Your discovery may have saved humanity." "Thank you, sir. We were fortunate." "Fortune favors the prepared," Park replied. "I've reviewed your report. The physics make sense. Their shields stop energy but not mass. Simple, yet no one thought to test it until your unit did." Lee remained humble. "We were just doing our job, sir." "Well, your job just got bigger." General Park's expression became serious. "We're organizing a global counteroffensive using artillery units from every nation. I want you to coordinate the Western Front." Lee blinked in surprise. "Sir, I'm just a captain." "You're being promoted to colonel, effective immediately. Your experience with the Terek makes you our most valuable asset." Park's voice softened slightly. "You've seen them up close. You know how they think." After the call ended, Lieutenant Kim approached. "Congratulations, Colonel." Lee stared at the map, still processing the weight of his new responsibility. "This isn't about rank, Lieutenant. The Terek are going to adapt once they realize what's happening. Then we need to strike hard before they do," she replied. Over the next 3 days, Lee coordinated with artillery units across 5 states. Old howitzers were pulled from storage. Museum pieces were made operational again. Ammunition factories ran day and night. Meanwhile, the Terek response was confusion and anger. Aboard the flagship orbiting Earth, General Dak slammed his armored fist onto the command table, cracking its surface. "How is this possible?" he roared at his officers. "These primitives should be kneeling before us." Officer Mech approached cautiously. "Sir, the reports are consistent. Our forward bases are being destroyed by primitive projectile weapons. Our shields are impenetrable," Dak insisted. "To energy weapons, yes," Mech replied carefully. "But the humans use solid metal projectiles accelerated by chemical explosions. Our shields were never designed to stop physical objects of that mass and velocity." Dak's secondary mouthparts clicked in irritation. Why wasn't this identified during our initial assessment? "Because no advanced civilization uses such weapons anymore," another officer offered. "They're inefficient, inaccurate." "And yet they're killing our soldiers," Dak interrupted. "Modify the shields immediately." The chief engineer stepped forward. "That would require a complete recalibration. Every ship, every personal shield would need to be recalled and adjusted." "Unacceptable." Dak studied the tactical display. "Deploy our heavy assault units. The humans may have found a weakness, but they remain primitive. Superior firepower will prevail." Colonel Lee received reports of the Terek response within hours. Massive new landing ships descended through the atmosphere, deploying larger aliens in heavier armor. Their weapons were bigger, their vehicles more numerous, but they still used the same shield technology. "They're too proud to admit they made a mistake," Lee told his officers during a briefing. "They think they can overwhelm us with numbers and firepower." Lieutenant Kim pointed to satellite imagery showing a major Terek base being established in the Rocky Mountains. "They're consolidating their forces here. It's their main staging area for the western United States." Lee studied the images. "They've chosen well. The mountains provide natural protection against conventional attacks." A plan began forming in his mind, but not from above. The operation took 5 days to prepare. Artillery units from across the country converged on positions surrounding the mountain base. Old howitzers were joined by modern self-propelled artillery. Every piece capable of high-angle fire was brought to bear. The Terek seemed unaware or unconcerned about the gathering human forces. Their base expanded daily, with landing pads for their ships and barracks for their troops. On the morning of the attack, Lee stood on a ridgeline overlooking the valley. Through binoculars, he could see the alien structures nestled among the mountains. "All units report ready, sir," Lieutenant Kim said beside him. Lee checked his watch. "Commence firing in 3 minutes. Continuous barrage, rotating batteries to prevent overheating." At precisely 700, the first shells were launched. They arced high over the mountains, invisible until they descended onto the alien base. The impacts were visible even from Lee's position. Bright flashes followed by rising smoke. The Terek responded with energy weapons, firing at human positions they could detect. But the artillery was too far away, protected by mountain ridges. Hour after hour, the barrage continued. Earth-shaking explosions echoed through the mountains as thousands of shells rained down on the alien base. Terek ships attempting to evacuate were targeted specifically, their shields useless against the metal projectiles. By midday, secondary explosions indicated that the aliens' own weapons and power sources were being hit. Massive fireballs rose above the valley as alien technology failed catastrophically. After 6 hours of continuous bombardment, Lee gave the order to cease fire. Silence fell over the mountains, broken only by the distant crackle of fires. "Send in the drones," he ordered. Small reconnaissance drones flew over the target area, transmitting video back to the command post. The images showed utter devastation. The alien base was in ruins, with craters overlapping craters. Few structures remained standing. No signs of organized resistance, the drone operator reported. I count at least 30 destroyed ships and numerous casualties. Lee turned to Lieutenant Kim. Inform General Park. The Battle of Rocky Mountain is over. The Terek have suffered their first major defeat on Earth. As the news was relayed up the chain of command, celebrations broke out among the troops. For the first time since the invasion began, humans had won a decisive victory. On his flagship, General Dak stared at the damage assessment in stunned silence. His secondary mouthparts were completely still, a sign of extreme shock in his species. "Impossible," he finally whispered. "How could primitive humans inflict such damage?" Officer Mech stood rigidly at attention. "The western base is completely destroyed, sir. Casualty reports indicate over 90% losses." Dak's inner eyelids blinked rapidly. "What weapons did they use?" "The same primitive artillery, sir. Our sensors indicate simple chemical explosives and metal projectiles." Another officer spoke up hesitantly. "General, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. If we recalibrate our shields." "No," Dak roared. "I will not admit defeat to a lesser species. Prepare our orbital weapons. If their primitive weapons are effective, we will simply destroy them from orbit." As his officers rushed to comply, Dak turned to stare at the blue planet below. For the first time in his long military career, he felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. The massive factory floor that once produced automobiles now buzzed with activity of a different kind. Where car frames once moved along assembly lines, workers now filled artillery shells with explosives. The transformation had taken just 5 days. Colonel Lee walked between the busy stations, impressed by the speed of conversion. An elderly engineer guided him through the process. "We're producing 5,000 shells per day now," the man explained, shouting over the noise of machinery. "By next week, it will be 10,000. Similar scenes played out across the globe. In Germany, breweries converted their metal tanks to produce shell casings. In India, textile factories now wove protective covers for artillery pieces. Every nation contributed what they could to the war effort. Lee's phone rang constantly with updates from around the world. After the Battle of Rocky Mountain, he had become a celebrity of sorts, the officer who discovered the Terek weakness. "Colonel, we have the video conference in 5 minutes," Lieutenant Kim reminded him as they left the factory. She had been promoted too, but insisted on remaining his second in command. In a makeshift office at the factory headquarters, Lee connected with military leaders from 20 different countries. The faces on screen showed a mix of exhaustion and determination. "The Terek are adjusting their tactics," he began. "They're avoiding open areas and concentrating forces in cities, using human populations as shields." A British general nodded grimly. "Same in London. They've occupied the financial district. We can't use heavy artillery there." "That's why we need to change our approach," Lee said. He outlined his new strategy as Kim displayed tactical diagrams. "Small, mobile artillery teams. Hit and run tactics. We don't need to destroy their bases. Just keep them off balance while we prepare the main offensive." A Russian colonel spoke up. "We've had success with old BM-21 rocket launchers mounted on civilian trucks. They fire, then immediately relocate." "Exactly," Lee nodded. "Approach in small teams, stay mobile, and rely on indirect fire. The Terek expect us to fight conventionally. Large forces, fixed positions. We need to be unpredictable." The strategy was approved unanimously. As the call ended, Kim showed Lee another message on her tablet. "Seoul is requesting your expertise, sir. They're implementing something unique." 2 days later, Lee stood in a Seoul subway tunnel, watching as workers modified a train car. The roof had been cut away and reinforced with steel frames that could be raised when needed. "The Howitzer sits here," Lieutenant Park explained, showing Lee the mounting system. When we reach a firing position, the roof panels open, the gun elevates, and we can fire from inside the tunnel. And the Terek never see where the shells came from, Lee said, understanding immediately. Lieutenant Kim had been overseeing the project for days. She led Lee through the tunnels, showing him the network of mobile artillery pieces that could strike anywhere in the city. We've mapped every possible firing position, she explained. Each train carries ammunition and a crew of 6. They can fire 3 rounds and be moving again within 2 minutes. How many units are operational? Lee asked. 15 now, 30 by the end of the week. We're calling them ghost batteries. Lee smiled at the name. Have they seen combat yet? Kim nodded. Yesterday, the Terek established a command post in Gangnam. 1 ghost battery fired 6 rounds from 3 different positions. The aliens spent hours searching buildings nearby, never suspecting the attack came from underneath them. Similar innovations emerged worldwide. In Venice, artillery pieces were mounted on barges that moved through the canals. In New York, hidden elevators raised howitzers to skyscraper rooftops for brief barrages before lowering them again. Museums emptied their military exhibits. A French museum director wept as he helped soldiers load a 75mm field gun that had defended Verdun in 1916. My grandfather served on this gun, he told them. Make it count. In London, the Imperial War Museum's prized World War I howitzer was carefully restored to working condition by retired artillery officers, some in their 90s. Killed Nazis with this in '44, one old man said as he adjusted the sights. It'll kill aliens just fine. Aboard the Terek flagship, the mood had shifted from confidence to concern. Officer Mech presented the latest casualty figures to General Dak with evident unease. Our losses have exceeded acceptable parameters, General. Human resistance is growing more effective. These are temporary setbacks, General Dak insisted, though his secondary mouthparts clicked nervously. Their primitive weapons may have surprised us, but our technological superiority remains absolute. Another officer spoke up hesitantly. Sir, engineering has completed their analysis. We can modify our shields to block their projectile weapons, but it would require recalling all forces for equipment updates. Unacceptable, Dak snapped. That would cede ground to the humans. We never retreat. With respect, General, Mech said carefully, we are losing troops faster than they can be replaced. The humans are targeting our command centers with increasing accuracy. Dak turned to the tactical display, studying the bright dots that represented Terek forces worldwide. There were fewer than when the invasion began. Intensify orbital bombardment, he ordered. Target their manufacturing centers. If they cannot produce their weapons, this advantage disappears. Mech exchanged glances with the other officers. Sir, we've lost 3 orbital platforms to their nuclear countermeasures. The humans sacrificed several of their cities to eliminate our ships. Dak's inner eyelids blinked rapidly in surprise. They destroyed their own cities. Yes, General. They detonated nuclear devices high in their atmosphere when our ships were overhead. The electromagnetic pulse disabled our systems long enough for their missiles to reach us. For a moment, silence fell over the command deck. The Terek had conquered 12 worlds, and none had shown such willingness for sacrifice. These humans are unexpected, Dak finally said. Colonel Lee stood in the United Nations Command Center, now housed deep beneath the Swiss Alps. Around him, screens showed military leaders from every continent. The global counteroffensive was about to begin. All sectors report ready, General Park announced. Colonel Lee, as the architect of this strategy, would you like to address the command staff? Lee looked at the faces watching him. Soldiers from nations that had been enemies just months ago, now united against an existential threat. The Terek invaded because they thought us primitive and divided, he said simply. Today we show them how wrong they were. Each of you knows your objectives. Trust your training, maintain discipline, and remember what we're fighting for. General Park nodded solemnly. Commence Operation Thunderstrike. Across the planet, At precisely the same moment, humanity launched its counterattack. Artillery barrages struck every major Terek position simultaneously. In cities, the hidden ghost batteries emerged briefly to fire before disappearing again. In rural areas, massive concentrations of howitzers pounded alien strongholds. From his command post, Lee watched the reports flow in. The Korean subway artillery hit 3 Terek bases in Seoul. London's rooftop howitzers struck alien ships attempting to land reinforcements. In Moscow, university students used hand-drawn maps to direct artillery fire when electronic communications were jammed. Lieutenant Kim monitored the American front. "Sir, the Rocky Mountain forces report the aliens are in full retreat. They're abandoning their equipment." Similar reports arrived from other theaters. The coordinated assault had caught the Terek completely unprepared. Their forces, spread thin to occupy territory, couldn't respond effectively to simultaneous attacks everywhere. "They never expected this level of coordination," Lee observed. "They thought they were fighting individual nations, not a united planet." By nightfall, the scale of the human victory became clear. Terek forces were retreating worldwide, abandoning positions they had held for weeks. Human casualties were significant, but far less than feared. As Colonel Lee studied the updated battle maps, Lieutenant Kim approached with a satellite phone. "Sir, it's General Park. The Terek flagship is hailing us. They're requesting a ceasefire." For the first time since the invasion began, Lee allowed himself a small smile. "Tell the general I'll be right there. It seems the aliens want to talk." The humans had turned the tide, not with advanced technology, but with artillery designs that had served them for over a century, and the courage to use them. The final Terek command center in North America stood among the ruins of what was once Denver. Alien structures rose like dark towers above the destroyed city. Their ships patrolled the skies, weapons ready. On a ridge 30 kilometers away, Colonel Lee surveyed the alien stronghold through high-powered binoculars. The morning sun glinted off the metal structures. "This is their last major base on the continent," he told the officers gathered around him. "Intelligence believes General Dak himself is coordinating from there." Lieutenant Kim spread a map on the hood of their vehicle. "We have 342 artillery pieces in position, sir. Everything from modern howitzers to Civil War cannons." Lee nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. For 3 months, humanity had fought back against the alien invasion. What began with a single artillery shell passing through an alien shield had grown into a global resistance movement. "Is everyone in position?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Kim confirmed. "We're just waiting for your order." Lee picked up his radio. "This is Eagle 1 to all batteries. Commence firing on my mark." He paused, taking one last look at the alien base. "All batteries, fire at will." The earth shook as hundreds of howitzers fired simultaneously. The sound was like thunder multiplied 100-fold. Shells arced high into the clear blue sky before plummeting down on the Terek command center. Through his binoculars, Lee watched as explosion after explosion rocked the alien structures. Their shields flashed blue where energy weapons struck, but did nothing to stop the physical shells raining down from above. "They still haven't adapted," Kim said in disbelief. "Their shields still can't stop kinetic projectiles." "Pride," Lee replied. They couldn't admit their technology had a fundamental flaw. The barrage continued for hours. Terek ships tried to locate the artillery positions, but the human batteries were well camouflaged and spread across too wide an area. Some alien craft managed to destroy a few howitzers, but there were always more to take their place. By midday, the alien command center was in ruins. Smoke rose in thick black columns visible for kilometers. Terek ships were fleeing, some crashing as artillery shells found their mark. "Sir," Kim called out, holding a satellite phone. "General Park is on the line. Our space-based sensors show the Terek flagship is breaking orbit." Lee took the phone. "General, we've destroyed their North American command center. The ground forces are in disarray. The same is happening worldwide. Park's voice crackled through the speaker. "Moscow, Beijing, London, all report the aliens are retreating." There was a pause. "Colonel, the Terek Emperor is requesting terms for surrender." 2 weeks later, Lee stood in what had once been a conference room aboard the International Space Station. It had been modified to accommodate both humans and the taller Terek representatives. Earth military leaders sat on one side of a long table, alien officials on the other. General Dak was noticeably absent. According to intelligence reports, he had been recalled to the Terek homeworld to face execution. The Emperor had no tolerance for failure. The Terek ambassador placed a 6-fingered hand on the document before him. "The Emperor accepts these terms under protest. We have never before granted such status to a conquered world." Earth was not conquered, General Park replied firmly. "Your forces were defeated in open warfare." The ambassador's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of irritation. "The treaty recognizes Earth as a sovereign and protected planet. No Terek forces will enter your solar system without permission." He pressed his palm against the document, leaving a purple mark, the Terek equivalent of a signature. Human representatives signed next. When it was Lee's turn, he paused, looking at the alien across the table. "Why didn't you adapt your shields?" he asked. "You had the technology to block our artillery." The ambassador's secondary mouthparts clicked softly. "By the time we realized the extent of the flaw, it was too late. Our supply chains were disrupted. Our factories under attack." He leaned forward. "But make no mistake, human. The next time we meet, our shields will stop your primitive weapons." 6 months later, Earth was transformed. Cities were being rebuilt. Alien technology was studied and adapted. Nations that had fought each other for centuries now worked together in unprecedented cooperation. At a military celebration in what remained of the United Nations building in New York, Colonel Lee, now General Lee, stood before a crowd of soldiers and civilians. "They never expected us to win with such simple weapons," he told the audience. "The Terek came with technology centuries beyond ours. They had conquered 12 worlds before Earth, but they failed to understand a fundamental truth. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the most effective." The crowd applauded as Lee unveiled a monument, a bronze howitzer pointing skyward, with the names of fallen soldiers inscribed on its base. After the ceremony, Lee met with Lieutenant Kim, now Colonel Kim. She headed the new Weapons Integration Division, combining human artillery designs with captured alien technology. "The new composite shells are ready for testing," she reported. "They maintain the kinetic impact of traditional artillery, but add an energy dispersion field that should counter any upgraded Terek shields." Lee nodded. "Good. What about the planetary defense grid?" "On schedule. The first orbital platforms will be operational next month." Intelligence reports from captured Terek databases suggested the aliens were rebuilding their forces with redesigned shield technology. Next time, they wouldn't make the same mistake. But humanity was preparing too. Lee was appointed as the first commander of Earth's Space Defense Force. His office sat at the top of a new tower in rebuilt Denver, with windows facing the stars. The room featured a small artillery shell mounted on his desk, the first one fired against the Terek. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Lee stood at his window looking up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Colonel Kim joined him, carrying reports on the latest defense preparations. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked. "Eventually," Lee replied. "But we'll be ready. They thought us primitive, but they learned that technology isn't everything. Human ingenuity, adaptability, those are weapons no shield can block." Kim smiled. "They certainly didn't expect artillery to be their downfall." "That's the irony," Lee said, watching a test launch of Earth's new defense satellite rising through the atmosphere on a trail of fire. "They came with plasma cannons and energy beams, and we beat them with artillery designed a century ago." As the satellite reached orbit, joining others in Earth's growing defensive network, Lee felt a deep satisfaction. The invasion had been devastating, But humanity had emerged stronger, more united, and with a new place in the universe. Earth would never again be seen as an easy target. The end.